As my life has unfolded from the late 60s when I started painting, as my life has unfolded, people say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this weird art? Even my mother, why are you painting these crazy paintings? Paint nice, pretty pictures, you could make money. And I had famous artists say, you know, if you do this other stuff, you're going to be rich. You do what you're doing, c'est la vie, you know. But what I do is people look at the art and they say, what are you doing? So then I explain it. But when I explain it, I get the spirit somehow, some way. And in some way, I get them to look at the idea that they have a soul. Now, why is that so important? Because I think the single most important thing, when people say, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose? What am I doing here? Why do I exist? You only have one major reason, and that is to develop your soul. Because you're going to die. Everyone is going to die. And before you get to that point, you've got to figure out how to make that that idea that you call you, that self-aware. You are a self-realized idea. You're not your body. You're not your flesh and blood. You are what you think you are. And you have to convince that and shift that from material body to a spiritual body. We do that in everything that we do, but you affirm it with your spiritual acts. You affirm it with your prayers. You affirm it with your kindness. You affirm it with your love. When you die, all your physical experiences are going to go. They die with the engrams of the brain, but the spirit remains. Either it goes back to God as an empty shell, there's nothing there because you didn't do anything, or there's a person there who's fulfilled themselves. And that's what I want my art to do to people. It awakens people. So this is what I'm doing. I'm fulfilling the dream. Oh, at the end of those dreams, by the way, they all ended in one returning vision or visual. I would be walking along a seashore. And you know how like when you walk on the ocean and there's these ripples of water that go around your legs and you kind of form this little wave as you're walking through the water? I was walking through the water, and the water would form these little waves, and the waves would turn. And as they turned, people would pop up, and they would be doing different creative things, different forms of art. Doesn't matter what the art is. The point is doing something creative, working with your hands. Whether you're a writer, a painter, a furniture maker, a shoemaker, a baker, a mother, that all of those things that we shifted from just doing them as labors and realizing that what we're doing is art. That when we align ourselves with the creative energy of the universe, because the universe is constantly creating, when we align ourselves with that, the soul awakens. The soul awakens. So you have a polarity here, the Renaissance on one end, and that shift from inward to outward, and then that beginning a whole new process, which takes us to modern art. And the ultimate modern expression was minimalism, which was big in the 60s. That's when people would put up blank canvases and say, imagine a painting there, and people will go, oh, wow, that's brilliant, and they would go for it. And we still have a lot of that. I call it intellectual fraud. It's just the manipulation of those who want to be above other people, so they create these highfalutin concepts that only they can conceptualize and imagine, and therefore everybody else is inferior, and have created social status and structure. Look, the Renaissance happened because of the Medicis who financed the artists, and these guys discovered you get prestige out of it. And in those days, you could have all the great wealth and be richer than the king or the pope or anybody else, but it didn't mean anything. Wealth was just wealth. But prestige, that was the magic of wealth. And you got prestige when you could put up a new Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Raphael, and people would talk about it and create all these highfalutin concepts. And that whole realm, that whole illusionary realm of those who don't do, copying prestige and authority and power from those who do create. Because there was a magic in the creativity. They understood that. And surrealism was basically a reaction to all of that. I said, but that's basically a polarity. Now, in my definition of metarealism, and the only reason I wrote a definition, because the very first time I did a show here in Denver, the guy who hosted my show was a place called Zach's back in 1976. He said, what is this stuff? This is weird stuff. And I said, well, I call it metaphysical fantastic realism. And it was sort of inspired by, like I said earlier, the metaphysical movement, the fantastic realism movement. And he said, this guy, he says, so sort of meta-real, yeah? I said, yeah, that's it. I said, can I have that? He said, yeah, sure, take it. His name was Rodney Luther. He deserves credit for that. And then another guy comes to me, well, what does that mean? So all of a sudden I said, oh, crap. It's not enough I give it a name. They wanted to have a meaning now. So I sat down and I wrote, and this was in 1977, metarealism is the externalization of interior realities via visual mystic metaphors born of a philosophic state that I call polar synthesis. They are neither reflections of the conscious mind as in traditional art, nor of the subconscious as in surrealism, but rather reflecting the continuum by which that polarity exists. And the idea is that when you recognize that the polarity is actually one, and Buddha taught this, Christ taught this, the polarity is actually one, you create a whole new thing. And that whole new thing automatically creates a whole new polarity. And you go from one to the other and you change and you progress. And that's progression. Ideas give birth to their counters and their counters. They fuse together, they become something else, and they evolve. An idea produces problems, the problems produce answers, the answers produce new polarities. And I said, this is what metarealism, it talks about the continuum which binds those two realities. And what is that? And I said, that's spirit. And Jesus said, the kingdom is within. And I said, okay, well then let's bring it out. Let's create God culture. Now, what does that mean? I'm not talking about religious culture. I'm not talking about people walking around in robes and crucifixes and, or Buddhist beads or whatever. I'm talking about a culture that takes the ideals that all these religions preach, the ideal of love, the ideal of compassion. So metarealism was the idea of, okay, let's bring the kingdom out. If we all have that goodness within us, if we all have that spirit within us, and we start to develop it, and we give ourselves to it, and we make it, the things that we create through that act of goodness, that's meta-real. Because it takes the metaphysical and it makes it real. The only time we know reality is when we touch, because then there's a direct contact. Everything that we experience is secondary. And in between the moments of those impulses is an eternity of time. You get into quantum physics and you discover that photons behave as if they're conscious. So then you say, well, doesn't that mean that light is conscious? Oh, but everything's made of light. All of this matter is little tiny vibrational units of light that are both particles and waves that are reflected. And those things are self-aware because you are an idea, you're self-aware. You're the nothingness in the hurricane. And all that activity around you, that's the physicality of your world. That's this talk, that's this room, that's this everything that you are. And when it comes to, talking to young people especially about being an artist, it doesn't matter whether you come from the city or you come from the rural areas. If you come from the rural areas, then in a sense, you're more innocent. In a sense, there's more to learn, and that can be very exciting. But the thing that you have to learn is that, one, you're going to get your butt kicked. It's hard. It's hard to be an artist. In our society, when people say, well, what are the careers? Well, politicians and businessmen and da-da-da, you have these categories. And the artist is always placed up there real high. But in the acceptance of the culture to the people maybe praise them and they overly worship them and stuff like that. Stars, everybody wants to be a star. The thing is, it's not easy for anybody. especially if you're going to try to be original, if you're going to try to be where you're speaking your own mind, your own soul. If you want to imitate or follow an order that's already followed, well, then, that's fine. That's okay. You might have a decent living. You could have a great living. But if you are going to step out on into the desert, as I call it, and walk that path and find your way to that, you will experience heartache, rejection, and whatever. But, and this is something else I tell people, there's this moment, whether it be painting or whether you're a musician, whether you're a poet, there's a point where you create something and you step back and you look at it and you go, holy crap, where did that come from? That come out of me? And then you get this feeling of elation, you get this feeling of bliss, you get this feeling of joy. Remember when I was explaining the thing about walking with the master? One of the things I got to emphasize here is the joy that I felt just standing near him. The joy was so powerful that even as I think about it, I can feel it. And this is what art does. When I call them aesthetic satoris, and that means when the two become the one. When you and what you're doing, whatever the medium is, whatever it is, when those things merge and they become one, you know it. And in that moment, you are unique in the universe.
Ode to the Master Artist, a tribute to Stevon Lucero. When the final tear arrives and dries on the third day, when all that was not complete is reconciled, after all the ceremonies close, a blue giant will remain standing in the grand spectacles of space, etched lovingly into the memories of social chaos. There is a drum beating at the base of every human heart, the grit of sand and mud and dirt, molding crimson clay into visions that haunt the wakeful spirit. Let it be known that he beat death multiple times, a gentle trickster, taking the reins of his final rodeo, resurrecting to complete his masterpiece, to remind himself and his friends of the insatiable gift, to bask in the last bursts of tangerine and turquoise, King Chicano in plain clothes, painting his dreamscapes, casually sailing east into the Prussian blue sky, making his final jokes, enjoying the resplendent parade, waving farewell to old doubts, philosophizing wildly about the Heyoka and the Mexica, telling his faraway tales of old souls who lit up his many days and nights. He was quick to remind you of the long count. Let it be known that he did his thing on his terms. Let it be known that his mission was to put God back into art, to be the grand fool, to bring joyful comedy to the tragedies, laying his beloved soul bare for the world to see. Meta-realist mirrors of jade and obsidian futures that root humanity back into earth, water, and sky. Let it be known that he completed his quest. Master artist, master teacher, treasured friend, master of the dimensions. We are with you always until the end of the age and beyond.